Good evening, doctors. Me, Nikita Pawar, behalf of Ajanta Pharma, would like to welcome you all on today's digital dialogue on the topic of management of diabetic dyslipidemia. We have today with us none other than Dr. G.C. Sekhar. He himself is a MBBS, FCGP, and practicing as a consultant diabetologist at Shubha Clinic, Varamadurai. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
I would also like to welcome all the attendees and the expert who has given their valuable time for this digital dialogue today. Without any further delay, I am handing this session to someone who is much more knowledgeable and having the experts in this particular topic, Dr. J.C. Sekhar.
Thank you, ma'am.
Over to you,
Good
sir.
evening.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, all of you. It's my great pleasure to be here with you this evening and talk to you on managing diabetes dyslipidemia. At the outset, I thank Ajanta Pharma for inviting me to give this talk, especially Mr. Senthil Kumaran, who was insistent that I should give the talk on this. In fact, he offered me a choice of talking on a DP4 inhibitor or dyslipidemia. I chose this dyslipidemia because it's more challenging and it's real tough to treat also. So I thought I'll take up this topic. I thank Mr. Senthil Kumaran for that. Once again, I thank Ajanta Pharma. I thank all the participants for your time and your presence. We all know diabetes incidence is increasing, just like skyrocketing the world over. And India has the dubious distinction of the second largest country in the world to have the largest population of diabetics, next only to China. And soon, India will take over China also to become the first country in the world to have the most number of diabetic patients. People of diabetes, rather than dying of diabetes, they die of major CV events much earlier in their life. That's one pitiable situation. And you know, in India especially, diabetes, insulin resistance, obesity, metabolic syndrome, all these clutters, they occur at least a decade earlier than the West, which means that the complications of diabetes and also, which means that the complications of diabetes also occur at least a decade earlier in us Indians than the West. And many of the diabetics, due to irregular control of their lipids especially, they develop cardiovascular death or a major atherosclerotic cardiovascular event, which may be a non-fatal stroke or non-fatal myocardial infarction or a peripheral artery disease or heart failure, so on and so forth. Just imagine at a young age, when they are most productive age, these complications should occur. It's really pitiable. And to avoid that only, the various associations, right from ADA to European associations, as well as our own Indian RSDA, they all recommend that as soon as a patient is diagnosed with diabetes, you should screen his lipids and take good control of them to prevent a major CV risk, atherosclerotic vascular disease risk. That's the main aim of this talk also. In the next 30 minutes, I'll be talking on how diabetes dyslipidemia occurs, why is it important, and dyslipidemia in diabetics, is it different from non-diabetics, when to test for dyslipidemia in a diabetic, how to treat, and what are the on-treatment goals, and a few slides on non-HDL cholesterol, because it's really come up in a very big way, especially in our Indian subcontinent, and a few slides on newer drugs in the management of diabetes dyslipidemia, and I'll finish off the carry-home points. We all know about this. The slide has been so frequent, so nice slide. It's the evolution of atherosclerosis, a harmless, good functioning endothelium being bombarded by constant hyperglycemia, advanced glycation in products, and antioxidant, whatnot. They slowly develop into foam cells in their layers. These foam cells turn into fatty streaks for a period of years, and they convert themselves to intermediate lesions, then forms the atheroma, and atheroma gradually develops into fibrous plaques. The first Second, on the first and the second decade, it takes at least 20 years for this to happen, not overnight. And so only we get cheated. We think nothing will happen, but suddenly the volcano erupts. The fibrous plaque gets dislodged, the lipid core gets dislodged, the blood vessel has a major atherosclerotic cardiovascular event. This is how it happens. So we should guard it. We got plenty of time to control it, and we should take all the care to control this. That's the main gist of the talk of this evening. And dyslipidemia burden in diabetics also is really very high. You'll be surprised to know that globally, every 3 out of 4 diabetic patients, they suffer from dyslipidemia. Patients with diabetes dyslipidemia range for about 16%. Diabetics without dyslipidemia are just 10%. And diabetes coexists with hypertension in about 18%. Whereas the combination of the lethal 3, diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia occurs in about 56% of the patients. This is the clinical worst triad which one can have: diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia. And just see this, in India, almost 9 out of 10 diabetics have dyslipidemia. This is really gruesome. In the world, event is just 3 out of 4. In India, almost 9 out of 10. And prevalence of dyslipidemia in women is 97.8%. This is really high. Almost everybody, a female, if she becomes diabetic, she has dyslipidemia. One good thing in women is if they keep slim and fit, they will never have dyslipidemia. Obesity in children, in women, in girls, it offsets all the beautiful good effects of the hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And once obesity sets in, gradually it leads to PCOS, infertility, and irregular periods, DUB, and when even they get married, mild infertility, and if they conceive, again GDM. It's a chain reaction. So we should take all the care to see that our children, girl children, and the girls who come to us, they should be properly counseled about keep their body fit without getting obese. It's a very, very important message which this slide conveys. And the prevalence of dyslipidemia in male is about 85.5%. So India burden is really high. Every 9 out of 10 diabetics have dyslipidemia. Just imagine the population of 325 million diabetics, how many dyslipidemic will be there? And why is it important is because the cause of death in people with diabetes really is mainly ischemic heart disease. Almost 40% of the people with diabetes, they die due to ischemic heart disease, as I already told in the first slide. And the other heart diseases account for about 15%. So totally, these cardiovascular diseases, they take 55% of the total cause of death in the diabetic patient. Diabetes per se kills only 12% of the diabetic patients. Cancer is more common in diabetes. It accounts for about 10%. Stroke for about 10%. And infections, others are much less than all these things. And diabetes in CID is a coronary atherosclerotic disease risk equivalent. This is very clear in this. Even though this study is a world study, it gives a lot of information. Done in 1998, it shows the 7-year incidence of myocardial infarction. When there's no diabetes, no infarction, the 7-year myocardial infarction rate is just 3.5%. When there is no diabetes and there is myocardial ischemia, the chance of you getting infarction is 18.8%. When there is diabetes and there is no infarction, myocardial ischemia, it's 20%. But when you have both diabetes and infarction, the rate is as high as 45%, which is really mind-boggling. And diabetes leads to increased mortality, overall deaths. And in the overall death mortality, in overall mortalities, when you are not a diabetic, just 5.3. But when you are a diabetic, it is 18.9, almost 3 times more. And death due to cardiovascular diseases in a non-diabetic is 24%. It's almost double, more than double if you have diabetes. And death due to renal causes is just 6.1% if you are non-diabetic, whereas it is almost 4 times high if you are diabetic. That's why diabetes works against you. And diabetes increases the risk of CVD in so many ways. It increases the risk of coronary plaque disruption and thrombosis. It increases platelet aggregation, increases fibrinogen, decreases the coronary arteries, it increases the sympathetic tone, it increases the plaque formation, plaque disruption, and it disrupts all the coagulating factors, and ultimately leads to thrombus formation and blockage of the arteries. And cardiovascular disease in diabetes, is it different from non-diabetics? Yes, it is very much. The CVD in diabetes is much more frequent in non-diabetics. It's more extensive than in non-diabetics. It's actually a multi-vessel involvement. If the bleaching occurs in one or two major results, it's easy to correct. But when it's a multi-vessel involvement, it's a real headache for the patient as well as the treating physician and surgeon. And it's distal disease, which is more difficult to treat. And silent ischemia and silent infarction are the trademark, hallmark of a patient with diabetes. It occurs in younger people, which is again, more young diabetics are affected with the CV events. There's increased mortality. Once you get affected, there's increased mortality. And even you do a good revascularization procedure, the worst outcomes, despite revascularization, occur in people with diabetes. There's increased restenosis after PCI, even with stents. And role of dyslipidemia is also really challenging. Whereas a systolic blood pressure more than 151 can kill 14% of the people, dyslipidemia kills 56% of the people. Dietary factors and physical activity are also less. So when patient comes to you first with hypertension, diabetes, and dyslipidemia, should first turn to lipids, then hypertension, and then only diabetes takes the choice. And lipid profile in diabetes is also strange. The LDL is normal or increased. Mind you, it's normal. LDL is, it seems to be normal or it's just increased with greater number of small, dense atherogenic particles. HDL is definitely low in all diabetics. Triglycerides are much, much elevated in diabetics, especially in Indians. This is how the LDC is different in diabetics. The normal LDL, the people with diabetes can be misleading, definitely. When there's no diabetes, the LDL particles are large. They have a small proportion of ApoB particles sticking onto them. Whereas in diabetes, the LDL particles become smaller. The ApoB proportion becomes more. So normal LDL, there may be a normal LDL cholesterol level. However, number of LDL particles, the concentration of ApoB is increased. So small, dense LDL with more ApoB, this is more atherogenic than the less dense and larger LDL particles. This is how it really works. The small, so even when the LDL level is almost normal, just about normal, you can't dismiss it lightly. Right then, you have to start the treatment to protect the patient from further CV events. And diabetes and dyslipidemia in India, diabetic dyslipidemia is one of the main causes of CV mortality, as we already told. It's a major risk factor for macrovascular complications in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus and affects 10% to 73% of this population. And dyslipidemia in diabetics commonly manifests in India, especially raised LDL, decreased HDL, and very high levels of TGL. This is called as atherogenic dyslipidemia. Reducing LDL levels can reduce CV events in both primary and secondary prevention. This is our own Indian study. It highlights the incidence of increased LDL levels in all diabetics. It's a the learnings with experts to advance diabetes dyslipidemia management study. It was a major study. It was a multi-center study conducted more than 226 centers. It was a prospective cross-sectional observational study. In 4,002 patients were screened across India, and in this, almost 70% of the diabetics have LDL of more than 100, which is high. TGL is less than high total cholesterol, more than 200 milligram was present in 46% of the patients. HDL was low, less than 40 milligram in about 46% of the patients. High TGL was found in 64% of the patients, and non-HDL ratio was 42% high in this group of patients. And LDL also very high, 35% patient high LDL of more than 130 in the group. So when to test for dyslipidemia in patient of diabetes should be right when the patient is diagnosed as a diabetic. Just as you take all the care in the world to measure his BP, to take an ECG, you should screening for lipid profile, which is very important. You should also test for microalbuminuria when the patient, and you should examine his foot for any sensations. This should be done. All 4 things should go routinely once you diagnose a patient of diabetes. And if there is dyslipidemia, and you start treatment, every 3 to 4 months of the initiation of treatment in dyslipidemic patients, to assess the response, should do a lipid profile test. Once stabilized, every year at least you should do a test. In high-risk individuals, every 6 months should be done. And treatment to be continued with statins lifelong, even after lipid levels become normal. How to manage dyslipidemia? non-pharmaceutical treatment is as much important as drug treatment. It's very important. Lifestyle modifications are indicated in all subjects with diabetes, irrespective of baseline lipid levels. This is very tough for the patient to advise and for him to follow, but it's a duty to persuade him to follow lifestyle modifications, which is very, very important. They include diet, exercise, weight loss, stopping smoking and tobacco use, and abstinence from alcohol. Mind you, stopping smoking is one good thing, which is much more beneficial than all our statins and antihypertensive drugs and the diabetic drugs. There's one basic thing which kills and affects almost all systems in the body. And this is a very beautiful slide, which I just love. Today, more than 95% of all chronic diseases is caused by food choice, toxic food ingredients, nutritional deficiencies, and lack of physical exercise. These four things go hand in hand with all our young children. I'm really worried about that. They should be taught to do regular exercises, to avoid fast foods, to have good nutrient-dense and not calorie-dense food, and they should have a stress-free life to protect in future diabetes and dyslipidemia. The dietary changes and dyslipidemia are very important, as I already told. For reduction of LDL cholesterol and increase in HDL, you should have reduction of saturated fats, especially butter, cheese, whole milk, ice creams, and fatty meals. Avoid trans fat. Total fat intake to yield 25-30% of calories per day, and increasing intake of omega-3 fatty acids and fiber. Your flax seeds and nuts are very high in omega-3 fatty acids, and your fish are very high in omega-3 fatty acids. And patient with hypertriglyceridemia, reduction of intake of simple carbohydrates, very, very important. You should always tell the patient that don't think only oil leads to high cholesterol. The amount of carbs which you take is very, very important. In our Indian custom, especially 85 to 90% of the intake is purely carbohydrates. They have a huge bowl of rice and some korambu or sambar, whatever it is, and finish off. And then only he feels happy and feels satiated, which is very wrong. Should always substitute portions of rice with more fiber and fruits. You can take them pulses like that. You should always substitute on how to reduce food, not overnight, but gradually over a period of week. You should take only enough calories to reach or maintain healthy weight. This is overeating. Our mothers and all female women folk, they think that they show their love to their children only by feeding them more and more, which is wrong. There should be only enough calories to reach or maintain healthy weight, and plenty of fruits, vegetables, and nuts and fibers. They reduce hypertriglyceridemia. And excess and dyslipidemia also is very important. It's a connection. The treatment of obesity has a favorable impact on plasma lipid levels. TGL and LDL fall and HDL increase in obese subjects after weight reduction. Aerobic exercises not only result in elevation of HDL, but also increase CV benefits. ADA recommends 30 minutes per day or 150 minutes per week of walking or similar exercise with alternate day of stretching exercise and weight bearing exercises. But for you to lose weight, you will have to do exercise at least for 15 minutes to 1 hour daily, and not 5 times a week. Then only you can lose weight. Then only obesity can be cured and dyslipidemia can be cured. And next comes the pharmacology interventions. You can lower LDL-C by lowering statins. Statins is the hero. They are the most commonly used drugs. They are so effective also. They act by competitively blocking the active site of the first and key rate limiting enzyme in the mevalonate pathway, HMC-CoA reductase. Next is ezetimibe is also coming very handy nowadays. This mechanism is different. It inhibits the absorption of cholesterol by the small intestine. That's how it acts. Bile acid resistance are not used much now. The PCSK9 inhibitors the PCSK9 is a proprotein convertase which binds to the LDL receptors on the surface of hepatocytes, leading to the internalization of and degradation of the LDL receptor and the lysozymes, and reducing the number of LDL receptors on the cell surface. The LDL receptors get so much reduced, there's absolutely no LDL to circulate, and it effectively reduces the level of LDL dramatically, these PCSK inhibitors. And pharmacological interventions, increasing HDL and lowering TGL is a real big challenge. Fibrates do a fairly good job. Gemfibrozil and fenofibrate are there in the basket. They stimulate cellular fat acid uptake, conversion of acetyl-CoA derivatives and catabolism of beta oxidation pathways, which combined with reduction in fatty acid and digital synthesis results in VLDL production. Fibrate, they acts a very good mechanism, and digital levels brought down. Nicotinic acid and saroglitazone are also, they are effective. Nicotinic is hardly used nowadays. Saroglitazone is really fairly useful in cases of the TGL reduction. And statins, as our hero, which told, right, we discovered the in the statins in the 1987. First statin introduced was lovastatin. It was being tried in the population. People were really amazed to see that there was a lot of severe risk benefit with the statins molecules. Then other statins came one by one, and only in the year 2005 and 2008 only higher levels of statins were given to the patient, and there was a very good reduction, very good CV reduction, CV mortality reduction was observed in the patients. So lovastatin, pravastatin, simvastatin, atorvastatin, all the basket. Atorva and Rosuva are the maximally more potent than other statins. And the statins not only reduce cholesterol, but they have a lot of pleiotropic effects. This came as a big surprise, and this was discovered only in the the first decade of this century. Improvement of endothelial dysfunction was there. They reduced inflammatory response. Stabilization of atherosclerotic plaques was observed. There was reduced thrombogenic response. They inhibited vascular smooth muscle cell proliferation, which is very important in atherosclerosis. They inhibit cardiac hypertrophy. The decrease in the incidence of ischemic stroke was observed with statins. And statins usually it is given as high density statins and low density statins. You should always know high density statin, high intensity statin is one which lowers the baseline LDL cholesterol by 50%. If your baseline cholesterol is 200, if the drug is able to reduce it to 100, more than 50% reduction, then it's high intensity statin. And moderate statin is one which reduces the baseline LDL cholesterol by 30 to 50% and not more than 50%, which means if your LDL cholesterol is 200 at the starting level, if you use a moderate intensity statin, it may come down to 160 or 140, not more than that. Whereas if you have a high intensity statin, it comes down to less than 100. Atorvastatin 40 to 80 milligram and Rosuva 20 to 40 are very good drugs that are usually clubbed in the high intensity statin therapy. And for moderate intensity statin therapy, you have atorvastatin 10 to 20 milligrams strength, Rosuva 5 to 10, simvastatin between 20 and 40, pravastatin between 40 and 80, lovastatin 40 milligram, fulvastatin excellent, pitavastatin. They are all once daily dosaging only. And what are the patient profiles in terms of therapeutic interventions? As per the European Society of Cardiology 2019, the patient profiles are described in this slide, beautiful slide. When patient has low CV risk, meaning he has got no atherosclerotic vascular diseases, risk factors to him. There is no, he's not a smoker, he's not obese, there's no family history of atherosclerosis, he's not hypertensive. Then you should target the LDL level to be less than 116 milligram. That's the drug you should give. And when the patient has a moderate risk, which means a young patient with less than 10 years duration of diabetes mellitus, type 1 diabetic mellitus less than 35 years, type 2 diabetes mellitus with less than 50 years. Mind you, type 2 diabetes mellitus, even if the age is more than 50, he becomes a moderate severe risk patient. And especially type 1 diabetes mellitus, if his age is more than 35, he becomes moderate severe risk patient. And young patients, if their diabetes history is more than 10, even without any age risk factors, he is clubbed under moderate severe risk. In those patients, you should aim the LDL target to less than 100 milligram. And patients with high severe risk, which includes these categories, markedly elevated single risk factor. Everything is normal, but TC is more than 310. All findings are normally, he's not a smoker, no history of family history, but LDL is more than 190 is high CV risk. And BP more than 180, 110 is a very high CV risk. And family history without other risk factors, when there's no BP, the cholesterol is still low, but his father has died of a massive MI at the age of 48 years. His mother has died with massive MI at the age of 58 years. For men, it's less than 50, and for women, it's less than 60. When that history is there, it becomes high CV risk. And moderate renal function, if the kidney begins to fail, he comes to high CV risk. And 10 years of, more than 10 years of diabetes mellitus without target organ damage against high CV risk. And very high CV risk, in those high CV risk patients should aim to reduce the LDL cholesterol to less than 70. This graph slide, please remember very well and practice on have it on a table, and you should use the statin accordingly. Especially with very high CV risk, you should aim the LDL less than 55, 90 to 55. And who are very high CV risk? Patients who have clinical ASCVD or imaging, or on imaging. He has a multiple blocks, he had a major MI, he is in heart failure. They are all very high CV risk patients. There is family history of ASCVD with another major risk factor. He is a smoker, he is very obese, he is a hypertensive, grade 3 hypertensive, becomes very high CV risk. If severe renal failure, as the renal failure progresses, with the eGFR goes less than 30, it's a very high CV risk. And DM, diabetes with target organ damage of more than 3 risk factors, is a very high CV risk. And even without all these things, if just a history of diabetes more than 20 years, even though it's not a hypertensive, it's no family history. If the age of diabetes 20 years in that patient with the type 1 diabetes, he is a very high CV risk. So you should use our statins judicially, keeping these risk factors in mind. And a small comparison between atorvastatin and rosuvastatin. Rosuvastatin seems to have an edge. So many trials have proved beyond doubt. So many trials have proved that rosuva has an edge over atorvastatin. Atorvastatin is a lipophilic action, rosuva has a hydrophilic action. Atorvastatin, you need high doses in ACS, whereas rosuva itself, we have low dose. It's a good secondary prevention. Rosuva is good for primary prevention. Atorva has more side effects like myalgia and all. Rosuva has less side effects. And with atorva, there's no GFR reduction, whereas rosuva boasts it has called a mild GFR reduction. Atorva, there are more drug interactions. Rosuva, there's less drug interactions. Atorvastatin is intermediate acting given at night, whereas rosuva is long acting, it may be given any time of the day. And atorvastatin increasing dose may increase HDL. Rosuva has a very good TGL HDL ratios. And these studies have proved in patients for primary prevention, the high risk hypercholesterolemia patients, in the ECLIPSE study and STELLA study conducted, they favor rosuva to atorva. Patients with the metabolic syndrome, the CONNECT study and Polaris study, they prove that rosuva has an edge over atorvastatin. Patients with high CV risk for primary prevention, the JUPITER trial and Discovery of Alpha study have proved that rosuva has an edge over atorvastatin. And for secondary prevention also, patients with regression of atherosclerosis, the COSMOS study and SATUS study have proved that rosuva has an edge over atorvastatin. And in patients with the ACS, the Space-Rocker study and Luna study have proved that rosuva does better than atorvastatin. And what about the statin-related side effects? The risk of statin-induced diabetes has got a very big hype. Many people are afraid to take statins because of this. Even patients who have half-baked knowledge from the internet, they come and ask you whether they will produce diabetes. But it's not so. Over a period of 4 years of statin treatment in 250 patients, 5.4 coronary heart disease events occurred for each one new case of diabetes. One new case of mild diabetes when compared to 5.4 major coronary heart disease events is almost nothing. And 9 muscular events were prevented for one new case of diabetes. The increase in A1C in JUPITER subjects without diabetes on rosuva was just 0.08%. There's a marginal increase in the risk of hemorrhagic stroke. There's one small, it's less than 0.1% in fact. The risk of marginal hemorrhagic stroke in patients taking statins is there. But statins, they protect very much against the ischemic stroke. In the JUPITER trial, the total number of patients enrolled is a big trial which gave the doubt that statins may produce diabetes. But the figures are final analysis, they are very good for statins. The total number of patients enrolled in JUPITER trial was 17,603. Of that, 270 of the statin group, it was divided in 2 arms. One arm was given statins regularly, and the second arm was not given, they were given placebos. In the statin group, 270 patients developed diabetes. And the non-statin group, only 216 developed diabetes. So the occurrence of diabetes went up when patients had one or more risk factors for diabetes. And for every 54 newly diagnosed case of diabetes, 134 vascular events or deaths were prevented. Managing a diabetes who is on statin therapy is easier, but statin prevents major CV events for that patient, which is and that's a world of good. And statin association myopathy also give lot of hype. As this the most common side effect is myopathy. It develops in 0.3 to 33%. So the broad range is there. Many studies prove, some studies say it's just 1%, some studies say it's about 30%. It's called as the nocebo effect. Patient, when you are given, you may develop, if you say that he may develop myopathy, pain in the muscles, he actually definitely develops. You don't tell him anything, he won't develop anything. Your mind works over the matter in those things. And typically defined as a muscle pain, weakness under cramps. The creatine kinase, which is an essential enzyme for muscle function, is a marker for muscle damage. When found in elevated levels in blood, you can ensure whether statin myopathy associated with statin use. You can order a creatine kinase and find it out. And it's treated by reducing the dose of statin or switching over to other groups of statins or by adding ezetimibe to a lower dose of statin. Rarely, statins may induce anti-HMG-CoA reductase necrotizing autoimmune, which is very severe. Early diagnosis and without the drug and the use of steroids will definitely improve this condition. And the use of statins in special populations is a small note. In patients with below 40 years, with elevated LDL, there's no ASCVD risk factors. You can observe with lifestyle modification and add statins if needed. In young patients below 40 years with ASCVD risk factors, when there's an ASCVD risk factor, add statins, either moderate or high intensity, depending upon the risk factor. And in pre-menopausal women, observe there's no question of statins because statins are contraindicated in pregnancy. So pre-menopausal women who are planning for pregnancy or those who are pregnant, statins are contraindicated. These points tell you whether diabetic specific enhancers that are independent of other risk factors in diabetic mellitus. These are diabetic specific risk enhancers. If they are there, definitely they should be given statins even before the age of 40. One is the long duration of diabetes, more than 10 years in type 2 diabetes and more than 20 years in type 1 diabetes. If the patient gets diabetes at 30 or 28 years old, then he needs a severe statin therapy. Albuminuria of more than 30 microgram albumin per milligram creatinine. When it develops microalbuminuria, it should be given statin. When the eGFR is less than 60, you have to give him statin. And patient has retinopathy, neuropathy, and when the ABA is less than 0.9, denoting peripheral arterial diseases, they should be given high dose of statins, which is very important. And in elderly people up to 70 years, statin therapy is indicated based on the level of risk. And elderly patients older than 70 years, initiation of statin treatment may be considered if they are high risk. And a few words about the non-HDL cholesterol. In India, especially, non-HDL cholesterol is so important to detect your HDL cholesterol from the total cholesterol level. Total cholesterol comprises of HDL, LDL, and VLDL. Not TGL doesn't come into picture. VLDL is almost 1/5 of TGL. So when you detect HDL from the total cholesterol, that's called the non-HDL cholesterol. Reducing LDL levels does not eliminate CV risk. Most patients obtain only 25% to 30% risk reduction. When the TGL level is above 200 milligram, non-HDL is a more precise therapeutic target, mind you. When the TGL goes more than 200, you should aim at non-HDL cholesterol. This is a more precise therapeutic target than LDL cholesterol. It can serve as an excellent proxy for assessing the total number of circulating atherogenic particles. So, in patient with atherogenic dyslipidemia, non-HDL may be superior to LDL predicting CV events, and so they should be used as the primary lipid target to treat. And this graph tells you within the non-HDL levels, no association was found between LDL-C and the risk of CHD. When the non-HDL is less than 160, you can see even the LDL goes more than 160, almost the relative risk is just less than 1. Whereas in contrast, a strong positive and greater association between non-HDL cholesterol and the risk for CHD occurred within every level of LDL-C. When the non-HDL cholesterol goes on increasing, there's a very strong, when the non-HDL goes on more than 190, and when the LDL is more than 130, that's the peak relative risk of CHD. So non-HDL-C is a stronger predictor of CHD risk than LDL cholesterol. This study also shows you beautifully is occurred in the diabetes care 2003 January. The patients who are followed up for about 10 years, when the non-HDLC was maintained less than 127, the CV events at the end of 9 years was less than 20. The non-HDLC was between 127 and 160. The CV events were about 30. And the non-HDL went more than 160. It touched almost 40 to 50%. So non-HDL is a very important marker which you should follow. The Lipid Association of India, their guidelines for triglycerides also come in very handy at this time. Targets of therapy of triglycerides. An elevated TGL level is not a target of therapy per se, except that they are very high. Focus on non-HDL simplifies management of triglycerides. This is a Lipid Association of India saying. When the TGL concentration is more than 500 milligram per deciliter, and especially more than 1000 milligram, reducing the concentration of to less than 500 to prevent pancreatitis becomes the primary goal of therapy. You should leave over LDL and start taking TGL at that time. And for non-HDLC, the Lipid Association of India says the non-HDLC is as a co-primary target is as important as LDLC for lipid lowering. Monitoring non-HDLC will provide a simple, practical tool for taking decisions. It does not require a fasting blood sample. Do not ask the patient to come in the fasting for lipid profile. I usually ask them to come only after 1.5 hours. I take the lipid levels along with the postprandial blood sugar, which is a more important marker. So I can assess the TG level especially. And the non-HDLC levels should be kept within 30 milligram of LDLC levels. When for treating non-HDLC, statins remain the first line agent, regardless of whether LDLC or non-HDLC is the target. And ezetimibe with the statins, ezetimibe is a beautiful drug. It acts by different mechanism by blocking the cholesterol transport into the intestinal cells. Its combination with statins help in reducing the dose of statins in statin intolerant patients. The clinical variables associated with the greatest likelihood of benefit with statin combination in these patients, you can always put them on statin plus ezetimibe combination. The list is the cardiac heart failure after CABG, hypertension and diabetes, older people of more than 75 years and who are smokers, and PAD, and when the EHR is less than 60, you can always combine statins with ezetimibe for greater benefits. And a word about PCSK9 inhibitors. They are the two things available in India, alirocumab and ovalocumab. They are costly. One shot costs about 18.5 thousand rupees. They are weekly doses. They're injectable. Sometimes they can cause hypertension. It's an adjunct diet and maximally tolerated statin plus ezetimibe therapy. They are not the first line of drug. First line of drug is lifestyle modification statin and ezetimibe. And over statin and ezetimibe, you can add PCSK if needed. For the treatment of adults with clinical atherosclerosis cardiovascular diseases who require additional lowering of LDL cholesterol. To reduce the risk of myocardial infarction, stroke, and coronary revascularization in adults with established CV diseases over and above statins. They don't come as the first drug. Only should give the maximum dose of statins plus ezetimibe. Then you can try PCSK9 inhibitors. And a word about saraglitazar. It's a beautiful drug, big costly drug. It costs about 35 rupees per tablet. It is approved for use in India by the DCGI. It's indicated for the treatment of diabetic dyslipidemia and hypertriglyceridemia with type 2 diabetes mellitus and not controlled on statin therapy. So here also, this drug follows after statin therapy. In the clinical studies, demonstrated reduction of TGL, LDLC, non-HDLC, and increase in HDLC was observed with saraglitazar. It's also shown favorable results in treatment of diabetes. It reduces fasting blood sugar and HbA1c, and it also is beneficial in case of fatty liver. Even though it reduces fasting sugar and HbA1c, it does not produce hypoglycemia. And the recommended dose is 1 tablet of 4 milligram once a day. So to conclude, dyslipidemia in diabetics is to be treated with lifestyle modifications. They come first always: diet, increasing physical activity, reducing weight, and stopping alcohol and smoking. Number 2, statins are the mainstay with either moderate or high dose statins depending on the associated ASCVD risk factors. They should be given. Hypertriglyceridemia is to be treated with aggressive glycemic control, fish oils and fat as indicated. Hypertension can easily control just by diet. You reduce the amount of carbs to 1/4 of what the patient takes. TGL levels come down beautifully. A combination therapy of statin with ezetimibe may be useful in patients who had a recent ACS and LDL-C of more than 50, as also with PCSK inhibitors if needed. Thank you for patient hearing. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer.
Good evening, Dr. Shekhar. It was a wonderful
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Thank you, sir.
And
I know,
really,
sir.
you have made a very lucid presentation, I should say. Much better than what some specialists do.
Oh, thank you,
Getting
sir.
confused with all the statistics and all. But your presentation is really wonderful. I think you can repeat once again for general practitioners. We are This has to reach the general practitioners.
Sure, sir.
They are the primary care physicians. They should know when and how to use statin as you mentioned.
Sure,
Thank you, Dr. Shekhar, for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for the blessing, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Govind Rajan from Madurai.
Sir, good evening. Nalla irukkinga?
Fine,
Yes, sir.
Fine, sir. Excellent presentation as usual. Dr. J.C. Shekhar, given a complete coverage. I was just looking for one or two omissions so that I thought I can cover it up. But he has not given me any chance. He has completely covered the topic. I don't have anything to add. Of course, he has told us about the atherogenic dyslipidemia and then how the small dense lipoprotein LP particles are very high in diabetics. All those things were very nicely dealt with. And of course, in the treatment part of it, he again gave actually preferences to the non-pharmacological measures first. That is the foremost one. And after that, of course, he has given importance to various statins and other drugs which are present. So it was a good topic. It was a good exercise done by Dr. J. Shekhar. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
And
Thank
all
you,
the
sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Shekhar, Dr. Vadivel Murugan.
Sir, welcome. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Actually, I'm not in Madurai. I'm in a different place.
Okay.
Anyway, I got your link. It's a very nice talk.
Fantastic, sir.
Especially the way you must treat dyslipidemia based on the risk. It is mild risk, moderate risk, high risk, very high risk, and the potential of statin. That is a very important point we must remember.
Yes,
it's
sir.
not just putting 10 milligram atorvastatin or 10 milligram rosuvastatin.
No, sir. Yes, sir.
It's depend on the amount of percentage of LDL-C you want to reduce.
Yes, sir.
And that is a very valid point. Very nice talk, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sir, all my teachers I have logged in. Dr. Kumaran sir, Govind sir, Vadivel. I'm so blessed. Thank you so much, sir, for the appreciation.
It was a pleasure listening to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. No, but as a student, I feel really blessed. No, with big teachers and all. You're all, when you have said good words, I'm happy. So thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
It's always easy to present, but presenting a lecture in a very lucid way and in a simple manner, I think that's the thing to be appreciated. What do you say, Vadivel?
Yes, sir. Very nice, Kumaran sir. Work, sir. But another thing, recently they are doing a lot of studies on COVID patients because statins, they not only act as a lipid lowering, they act as anti-inflammatory also. Anti-inflammatory drugs, they protect the endothelium. There are so many pleiotropic effects of statins.
I had a full slide of that, sir. I had a full slide of how they pleiotropic effect. It was discovered only in 2005 or 6 when hydrogen statins were used. Previously, when levastatin came, it was not that much obvious. But when you use high dose of Rosuva and atorvastatin, it just baffled them. Just as there's hype now about these SGLT inhibitors, it get a big hype in those days. Statins could reduce so many things, much more than beyond reduce the cholesterol levels. So it was nice, sir. Yes.
Say, I remember the first treatment they started for high cholesterol level in my practice was with clofide. I don't know whether you have used it or not, clofide. It was very useful, but only thing it precipitated acute pancreatitis and cholelithiasis. And then came some, what is called the drug called Googly. I don't know whether they.
Yes, sir. Yes, I remember.
Cipla.
Those,
Before the
yeah.
statins all came, those are called Googly. And then came the, of course, statins. Along with that came the fibrates. First fibrate was, of course, what is that? Lopid by Park Davis. What was the name? I don't remember. Lopid. And then came fenofibrate and bezafibrate. And bezafibrate, I think, fenofibrate still remains
Yes,
as an adjunct therapy. Of course, ezetimibe. I tell you,
very
ezetimibe.
yeah. Now it's come back in a big way.
Don't tolerate statin. Ezetimibe makes a very good
Yes,
alternative. And also, if you want to bring down, you can combine both together, ezetimibe and statin.
You can reduce some statin and then add azimiprid. If the patient not able to tolerate high dose of statin, you can add azimiprid always.
Yes, that's good.
And only when those two are not able to achieve, we go for PCSK and inhibitors and other things.
You cannot afford PCSK. I don't know.
It's very costly.
And
I haven't used.
yes, I have no idea about that.
Since Dr. Kumaran was mentioning about fenofibrate, I think it is right time to tell you that fenofibrate should definitely find a place in all diabetic patients who have got diabetic retinopathy. In retinopathy, this is the best drug. Fenofibrate has to be given for all diabetic retinopathy patients. It has a special role. And that was again emphasized by Dr. Gopinath in one of his meetings.
Okay.
So fenofibrate definitely has a role in diabetic retinopathy. So it has to be added.
So in all patients diabetes, that definitely the teachers increase. Even we put them on combination of statin and fenofibrate. I don't usually unless TG level is less than 200, which is not usually. It's more than 250, 300, even 350, 400. They take a lot of carbs. No, you stop them, they won't stop. It's our Indian culture is so much. If they feel satiated. Otherwise, very tough to reduce cost. They don't understand.
Okay, that was nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A few questions. Dr. Puthuvandan has asked oil recommendation for the best profile. It's actually a mixture of oils is advised. No need to go for imported oils and all. Our own good ginger oil is good, coconut oil is good, and coconut oil is good. You have to mix the oils. Don't use one oil continuously. You can go up to 3 to 4 spoons of oil per day. Not better, not more than that. And ghee is recommended by ADA. Up to 30 grams of ghee is recommended. If you are a hard worker, if you work in the fields or got continuous for more than 2 hours, ghee is very good. They say in the latest recommendation, ADA is told about it. But our people won't. They say
the caveat is physical work.
I think there are no more questions, sir. Any comments, sir? Anybody wants to give?
No comment, only a request. In the future endeavors also, please pass on the link so that we'll be able to.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks.
As Jyotiraj said, some of us are always interested in CMEs, and because every time we learn at least some good points. So we would like to take part in almost all the CMEs.
Fantastic.
Whenever there's, of course, Dindigul Baptist Club is wonderful.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So Murli and
my hearty congratulations to the Dindigul and also to the Shekhar and your colleagues.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a very informative session. Thank you all the attendees for your valuable time and that involvement during this DAPT and dyslipidemia session today. This is doctor never goes off duty, and therefore it's been very valuable for you, valuable of your times which you have given today for this digital dialogue. Once again, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks all the participants. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.